السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Jazakallah, Mufti Zahir, for giving us this opportunity. Topic for today obviously is spiritual reformation. And before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent down our Prophet Adam alayhi salam. So before He sent him down, when He first created Adam alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala extracted out of Adam alayhi salam the entire human population. Out of the back, the soul of Adam alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He took out all of human beings. So every human being that is to enter into this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them all out from the soul of Adam alayhi salam. And He presented them all, and they were all present in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He asked them, Alastu bi rabbikum. Alastu bi rabbikum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He asked every single human being that was presented in front of Him at that time, before Adam alayhi salam was sent to the earth. He asked, Am I not your Lord? This was a correct question Allah asked all the human beings. To which every single human being, myself, you, all the brothers who are present today, every single human being that is in existence today, in the past, and in the future that shall come into existence, every single human being, they replied, Bala, which means, of course. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created every single human being naturally disposed or naturally submissive and obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is our nature. By nature of the soul, the pure soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed us with, we are naturally obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought us into this world, and He entered us, and He entered our souls into our physical bodies, which in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He subjected us to the temptations of this world. Okay, by placing us in these bodies and on this earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it so that we're able to be corrupted. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions that in one hadith where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was giving a sermon, he mentions a hadith Qudsi, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically speaking. It's not Quran, but it's a hadith where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, or rather Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, He said, وَإِنِّي خَلَقْتُ عِبَادِي حُنَفَاء كُلَّهُمْ. I created all of my slaves hunafa. Hunafa means as monotheists, as believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as believing in one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I created all of them hunafa. And this is where the hadith comes, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. That every single human being that's born, every single child that's born, is born upon the fitrah. What is the fitrah? The fitrah is this inclination towards submissiveness towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you go back to where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked us, Alastu bi rabbikum, we all replied, Bala. Why? Because again, it's in our nature to be obedient and submissive towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also in the Quran, He says, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهَ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. That it is the fitrah, it is the nature upon which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created every single human being. So again, the point is that every single human being has been created naturally subservient and submissive and obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah created us pure in that sense. So carrying on with the hadith Qudsi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنِّي خَلَقْتُ عِبَادِي حُنَفَاءَ كُلَّهُم. I created all my slaves as حُنَفَاء. وَإِنَّهُمْ أَتَتْهُمُ الشَّيَاطِينَ فَاجْتَالَتْهُمْ عَنْ دِينِهِمْ. So the question is, okay, if we're all created pure, why is it that we fall into sin? That's the question. Yeah. If we're all created pure, why is it that we fall into sin? Well, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in this hadith Qudsi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the answer. He says that after Allah created us upon Hanifa, upon Hunafa, shayateen come to us. And they turn us away and they manipulate us away from Allah's religion. Shayateen come to us. Allah made it so that Allah tests us with the shayateen. So again, in the alam al-arwah, before Allah put us into this earth, Allah created us pure. When He entered us into these bodies, in this earth, we are subject to manipulation. And who is this manipulation by? Shayateen. Yeah, the shayateen. Allah continues in the hadith Qudsi, وَحَرَّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ مَا أَحْلَلْتُ لَكُمْ. Or rather, وَحَرَّمَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ مَا أَحْلَلْتُ لَهُمْ. And the shayateen, they make impermissible what I made halal for them. And vice versa, the shayateen make halal what Allah made haram for us. So again, Allah gave shayateen the ability to manipulate us in that sense and turn us away from the pure state in which He created us. And the hadith continues, وَأَمَرَتْهُمْ أَن يُشْرِكُوا بِي مَا لَمْ أُنزِلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا. And that the shayateen, they order human beings to commit shirk for which there's no evidence. There's no evidence for shirk. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, though we're created in this pure state, by means of placing us in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has subjected us to manipulation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Nas, Allah says, يُوَسْوِسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ مِنَ الْجِنَّةِ وَالنَّاسِ. The shayateen, they have the ability to whisper into the hearts of men, the chests of men, and corrupt them through temptations, through whispering and tricking mankind into following bodily temptations. And through this, the soul of the human being, the pure soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, upon the fitrah, upon tawheed, upon inclination and submissiveness towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the shayateen, by means of manipulating the bodily desires, going towards haram, going towards what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made haram, the shayateen are able to manipulate the soul and corrupt the soul. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He says, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ. That there's rust upon their hearts. Meaning those people, the kuffar, and people in general, both Muslims and non-Muslims, whenever we commit sin, as Prophet ﷺ mentions in one hadith, that whenever a person commits sin, a black dot appears in their heart. And the Mufassirun, they mention that this hadith is explaining that كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ, in the verse where Allah says there's rust upon their heart. So a person, the more sin he commits, the more he prioritizes his worldly desires, his bodily desires, the more he prioritizes the world over his soul, the more he prioritizes the dunya over the akhirah, and he falls into sin, the more deeper he falls into sin, the blacker and blacker his heart becomes, until it's full and covered with rust. The question is, a person who comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this black and rust covered heart, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala once gave him a pure heart. When we say heart here, we don't mean the physical heart, by the way. Yeah? We mean the spiritual heart, the soul. So the question is, a person who comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this corrupted soul, this soul and this heart that is black with rust, the question is, can this person enter Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pure Jannah? Can this individual who is so deep in sin, who instead of prioritizing the spirituality of life, prioritizing the akhirah, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead of remembering Allah, he turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making the dunya his end goal, and thus by corrupting his heart and making it rust covered, can this person meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a favorable manner? The reality is that our goal in this life is to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us, in the state of fitrah, in the state of purity of soul, purity of heart. That's our goal, to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that state. Rather, it's our goal to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a state better than that. Why? Because we as human beings, we have the capacity and the ability to be even better than angels. But how can this be done? The way in which this can be done is by, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, that those who will be in Jannah will be those who have a nafs al-mutma'innah, a soul that is content, a soul that is happy. How do we attain contentment in this world? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, that the hearts, they find contentment in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our goal in this world is to create a state in our lives where we are always constantly in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what we call the state of taqwa. Yeah, taqwa Allah is consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, isn't it? Yeah. This is taqwa Allah. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, that this state of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a state of being content, where the soul is content. In fact, Imam al-Ghazali, he explains this idea that the human faculties, what do we mean by faculties? What we mean by that is the faculty of sight, of hearing, of the faculty of the soul as well. But he mentioned that human faculties, they gain the most contentment, they gain the most pleasure in that which they were created for. What do you mean by that? So you have the faculty of sight. The sight finds pleasure in the reason for which it was created. So the eyesight was created to see. So we find pleasure when we look at nice things. Okay? The faculty of hearing has been created to hear. So we find pleasure in hearing nice melodies and so on and so forth. The faculty of taste, we find pleasure when we eat nice food. Likewise, the faculty of the soul gains pleasure for the reason it was created. The soul was created, the heart, the spiritual heart was created to know. Yeah? The heart was created for knowledge, to know. That's why there's a sense of pleasure we gain when we learn. Yeah, we're all here today. Why? Because we want to learn. We want to know what we once didn't know. And there's a sense of pleasure that comes from knowing. Therefore, it makes sense that the soul finds pleasure in, what we mean by knowing is knowing truth. Yeah? So the soul finds pleasure in truth. The soul finds pleasure in the highest truth. What higher truth is there than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Therefore, the soul finds pleasure in knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah is the greatest and highest truth. Do you understand? How do we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the highest truth? Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in a hadith, he mentions that the truest words ever spoken by a poet was the statement of Labid, who said, "Ala ma kharallahu batil," that everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is false. Everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is zero. Everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is void. If everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is zero, if everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is false, we're left with the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only truth. Hence why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says that كُلُّ شَيْءٍ هَالِكْ إِلَّا وَجْهَهُ, that everything shall be destroyed, everything shall come to an end except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's face. So if you go back to what Imam al-Ghazali said, that a faculty, the human faculty, finds pleasure in what it was created for, the soul, the mind, the consciousness, the heart, whatever name you want to put it, it finds pleasure in knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This goes back to the verse, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, the remembrance of Allah, knowledge of Allah, to bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mind, doing dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is where hearts find peace. And by reaching a state in our lives where we're able to always be in a remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we will be able to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as an-nafs al-mutma'inna, souls and human beings that are content. Content in what? In the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the question is, how do we practice dhikrullah? How do we practice remembrance of Allah? Is it by sitting in the masjid and doing adhkar all day and reading Quran and salah all day? Yes, this is an option, but let's be honest, this is impossible. You have to go home, you have to eat, you have to rest, you have to sleep, you have to do all these things to survive. The way in which we practice dhikrullah is by acting upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sharia, the rules and regulation and the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down to us. This is how we attain dhikrullah. Because if you think about it, when we go about our days, if we're always thinking, is this halal, is this haram, is this wajib for me to do, is this makruh, if you're always thinking that, from what angle are we thinking this? From the pleasure of Allah, isn't it? We're thinking, what best course of action can I take to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And acting upon the sharia is Allah's command for human beings on how to deal with the world, how to do ibadat, how to do mu'amalat. Mu'amalat is everything other than ibadat. Yeah, how do we trade with one another? How do we eat? How do we sleep? Etc. etc. So the way we practice the dhikrullah is by acting upon the sharia. There are three aspects of sharia that a person needs to perfect and master. The first is al-a'mal, actions. So prayer, everything that includes actions, prayer, fasting, even how we eat, what we eat. This all comes under al-a'mal, actions. The other aspect of Islam that we must master and perfect is beliefs. We have to have the correct beliefs. You can't, shirk. So we mentioned that the most pleasurable thing to a human being, the most pleasurable thing for a soul is truth. The highest truth is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also, knowledge of Allah is the highest good as well. The best thing a human being can do is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And to know Allah means to obey Allah, because if you truly know Allah, you know that He is deserving of your obedience. The opposite of that, the worst evil, what's the worst evil a person can commit? What's the worst evil a person can commit, brothers? Shirk. Shirk is not knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person who knows Allah, would he ever commit shirk? So you have a wrong understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's the two sides of the coin. The highest good is knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The lowest and the worst evil is ignorance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So going back, the aspect of Islam that relates to beliefs, we have to have correct belief. There is also an aspect of Islam that relates to spirituality. Yeah, that's the third aspect of Islam. Yeah, it relates to spirituality. The cornerstone, the main pillar of spirituality is ikhlas. Yeah. The idea that everything we do is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ikhlas and humbleness. This, so in order to gain a state of taqwa Allah, we have to perfect all these three aspects of Islam. Our a'mal have to be perfect, our actions, our belief has to be perfect, and our heart, okay, our character, our mind, our heart also needs to be perfect. We live in a time, and it's almost poetic, that we live in a time where the Muslim Ummah is divided. And if you think about it, there's certain groups that they divide these three aspects of Islam. So you have a group that prioritizes beliefs over everything else. Like the Christians, they have this idea that as long as you have correct Islamic belief, as long as you have correct belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's enough. You're saved. Yeah, you're saved from punishment. Don't worry about if your actions are messed up, if you're committing haram, this and that. Don't worry about if your character and your spirituality is down low. As long as you have belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's enough. You have another group who, like the New Agers and like the hippies, they think that all you have to do is be spiritual. That all you have to do is be a good person. All you have to do is do azkar all day, and you don't have to practice the sharia. You don't have to practice the al-amal side. You don't have to have correct belief. There's a group of Muslims who prioritize only spirituality. And then you have a group of Muslims that only, like the Jews, they only prioritize actions. That as long as you're acting upon the rule of Islam, don't worry about your iman and your spirituality. But the reality is all these three are part and parcel of Islam. And we know this from the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, where Umar radiallahu anhu, he narrates that a man came to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was wearing super white jubbah and extremely black hair. He came to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He didn't have any sign of traveling. Nobody recognized this individual. And he sat in front of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his knees in line and touching the knees of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he put his hands either on his own thighs or the thighs of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he questioned Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He asked him, tell me, what is Islam? Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied to him. He said, Islam is that you take the shahada, that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his messenger, final messenger, that you pray salah, that you give zakah, that you fast, and that you do hajj, the 5 pillars of Islam. Al-Islam represents the al-amal side, the action side of Islam. Then this individual, he asked Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell me about iman. To which Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, iman is that you believe in Allah, wa malaikati wa kutubi wa rusuli wal yawm al-akhir wal qadri khayri wa sharri. That you believe in Allah, His angels, His books, His messengers, the last day, and the idea of all good and bad is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the belief side. So we have Islam, which represents al-amal, the action side of Islam, the rules and regulations of Islam. You have iman, which represents the beliefs that are part and parcel of Islam. And this individual, he asked Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell me what is ihsan? To which Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, that you worship Allah as if you can see Him, and if you can't see Him, then verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you. Okay, and the scholars mention that this is talking about ikhlas. This is the ihsan, is the spiritual side of Islam. So I understand you're going to do a dhikr majlis, is that right? After this. So just one last thing, dhikr, when we're doing dhikr, in actuality we're fulfilling and we're practicing all these three aspects of Islam. Because when we pronounce the dhikr, we're doing the al-amal. When we ponder over the meaning, let's say we ponder over the words Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest, what we're doing, we have belief that Allah is the greatest. And finally, when we ponder further, we understand our own state, which is a state of humility and humbleness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if Allah is the greatest, then we are humble towards Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us and let us act upon what has been said. Jazakallahu khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.